Soldiers of the Ukrainian Special Operation Forces have entered Russian Army's position, capturing 12 Russian servicemen and killing 17 others. Operators of 73 Marine centers and 6 Ranger regiments destroyed 17 Russian soldiers and captured 12 others during a raid on the adversary's positions in Kursk region. Since early October, Russia has stepped up attacks in its Kursk region, where Ukrainian troops launched a large-scale incursion in August. Russia aims to recapture the border region before U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration in January to have an upper hand in negotiation table. Ukraine is losing ground in the region, with Russian troops recapturing around 40% of lost land. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy earlier said that Russia's President Vladimir Putin is to push Ukrainian troops out of the area by January 20th next year.
The occupiers in eastern Ukraine are bringing in reserves, including former female prisoners, to fight in the war in Ukraine. This was stated by the spokesman of the Operational Strategic Group of Forces Khortytsia of Ukraine, Nazar Voloshin. He noted that the enemy is concentrating its main efforts on the Pokrovsk, Kurakovsk and Vremovsk directions. According to him, the enemy is suffering heavy losses and is bringing up reserves. The enemy is bringing up reserves that it had in other directions. The Russian military command is forced to use a significant part of the strategic reserves that it has accumulated over the course of this year to seize territories in the Kurakovsky, Vremovsky and Pokrovsky directions. The Russian army does not have unlimited capabilities, but it is bringing up reserves, including armored vehicles and personnel, to support its assault operations, Voloshin said. He added that newly mobilized and former prisoners were also seen in the ranks of the Russian troops. And recently they were seen, and we have information that women were recruited to participate in the assault actions. These are former convicts from the Storm units, and these units are formed from former convicts, he noted. Voloshin reported that prisons in the Russian Federation are almost empty because convicts are sent to participate in military operations on Ukrainian territory without their consent. He said that there are isolated cases when prisoners said that less than a month passed between the announcement of the sentence and their captivity. The Russian army is gradually expanding the role of women as it seeks to balance President Vladimir Putin's promotion of traditional family roles with the need for new recruits for the war in Ukraine. The military's stepped-up appeal to women includes efforts to recruit female inmates in prisons, replicating on a much smaller scale a strategy that has swelled in ranks with male convicts. Recruiters in military uniforms toured Russian jails for women in the fall of 2023, offering inmates a pardon and $2,000 a month, 10 times the national minimum wage, in return for serving in frontline roles for a year, according to 6 current and former inmates of 3 prisons in different regions of Russia. Dozens of inmates just from those prisons have signed military contracts or applied to enlist. Women now feature in Russian military recruitment advertisements across the country. A pro-Kremlin paramilitary unit fighting in Ukraine also recruits women. The Russian military's need to replenish its ranks for what it presents as a long-term war against Ukraine and its Western allies, however, has clashed with Putin's ideological struggle, which portrays Russia as a bastion of social conservatism standing up to the decadent West. A scandalous incident occurred in the State Duma of the Russian Federation with the niece of the Russian leader Anna Sivileva, who holds the post of Deputy Minister of Defense. She revealed information about the enormous losses of the Russian armed forces in the so-called SVO. The scandal occurred at a round table dedicated to supporting war veterans. The broadcast of the meeting was urgently removed from the Parliament's website, but eyewitnesses managed to record an excerpt. At the meeting, Sivileva reported 48,000 requests from relatives of military personnel to conduct DNA testing to identify the remains of dead servicemen. We also take all relatives' DNA. They give it for free. It is also entered into the database. All relatives who have contacted us, 48,000, said Putin's niece. Her words alarmed those present. The head of the State Duma Defense Committee, Andrei Kartapalov, reprimanded her and demanded that the announced figure not appear in any documents. This is such closed, sensitive information. When we draw up the final documents, we also want these figures not to float around anywhere, the deputy said. In fact, we are talking about Russian soldiers who went missing in the war against Ukraine. There is reason to believe that most of these 48,000 are indeed dead servicemen. It is known that the Russian armed forces often refuse to evacuate the bodies of their soldiers killed in the war, as the military themselves and Z-War correspondents say. At the same time, 48,000 is only a part of the losses of the Russian army in this war. Information on this topic is classified in Russia. Its disclosure threatens a prison term. According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, as of December the 3rd, the total losses of the Russian armed forces during the Great War exceeded 745,000 soldiers. However, this figure includes not only the dead, but also the wounded occupiers. The Economist calculated how many soldiers died during the 1,008 days of the war on both sides. It is worth noting that the previous estimate by The Economist, published in July 2024, indicated that as of June the 21st of this year, between 106,000 and 140,000 servicemen of the Russian armed forces had died. At the same time, the publication cites data from a November report by the Wall Street Journal, and this media outlet, citing anonymous representatives of Western intelligence, claims that more Russians have died, up to 200,000 people. The Economist also notes that in order to achieve their goals of quantifying Ukraine's losses after a full-scale Russian invasion in 2022, the journalists began by collecting data on those killed in action from leaked or published reports from intelligence agencies, defense officials, researchers, and open-source intelligence. At the same time, it is noted that these reports are difficult to verify, and soldiers who are missing and presumed dead are not always recorded in the data. At least 60,000 to 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died so far. Another 400,000 may be too wounded to continue fighting. These figures do not include civilian deaths, the media writes. The Russian Federation will have to wind down the war against Ukraine in the near future without achieving victory. Because of this, the country will face a severe post-war crisis. Russian ultra-patriot and former State Duma deputy, retired Colonel Viktor Auksnis, writes about this in his blog on Telegram. He is confident that after the inauguration of President-elect Donald Trump in the United States, the Russian war against Ukraine will be frozen along the front lines. The majority of countries in the world want the war to end, including our friendly countries, China and India. We will not be able to resist this majority alone. And despite all our statements that all the goals of the SVO will be achieved and victory in Ukraine will be achieved, in reality, there is no one and nothing to achieve this. For the first time in over 100 years, we are in for a severe military defeat with the gravest consequences. Auksnis wrote, he specified that propaganda will present the end of the war as a victory, which most citizens of the country will believe and rejoice in. However, the consequences will not be long in coming. We are facing difficult times and we need to be prepared for them, wrote the Z Patriot. Political strategist Abbas Galiamov, who in the past worked as a speechwriter for Vladimir Putin, also predicts an acute post-war crisis in Russia. He warned that the myth of a non-existent victory that the Kremlin will present to Russians will quickly collapse, and Russian citizens will be confronted with an unpleasant reality. When the heads sober up, it will dawn on them that no denazification has happened and there is a problem with demilitarization. Never before has the Ukrainian army been as armed as it is now, the expert wrote in his column for the resource Tochka. In his opinion, economic problems, which will not go away after the war and will affect the standard of living, will also have a strong impact on the mood of Russians. All this, Galiamov believes, will lead to a sharp drop in the ratings of the Putin regime.